Well, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and this is HawkTalk 47 with CEO of EdgeConneX, Randy Brouckman, and we're talking about the data center industry next.
Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, focused on cloud and co-location, data center industry trends, and dynamic market.
Well, this is David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I'm so excited to be joined by EdgeConneX CEO, Randy Brouckman. Randy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here, David. Thank you.
Yeah. This is one of my most favorite things that I get to do within our industry for a number of reasons. One of which is, so many of the people running the large either data center operators or, groups that are really doing things in the space just have really interesting backgrounds about how they came to lead the companies that they're leading today. And I know obviously that you're an engineer by background. But I would love to hear about, and I'd love for our listeners to learn about just your background and how you ended up founding EdgeConneX years ago and just your background in the space.
Yeah, I think people knew how good an engineer I was, and so they quickly made sure I was on the business side of things. But that aside, we started EdgeConneX together, myself and my co-founder and COO, Edmund Wilson, over 10 years ago now. We started it with the belief that there was a new edge of the network coming. And our original concept was to bring small co-location facilities as far out as the cell sites. Now this was pre-4G, pre-LTE, if you will. I think Apple was probably on release 2 of the phone. And AT&T was still the only place you could buy it. But we kind of recognized and believed that there, the highways, the fiber highways were going to go deeper and further, that LTE was going to be a viable on and off ramp to the internet. And like any highway you build, no matter how many lanes it is, traffic fills it. We guessed right on video. Now, all that said, using probably the Braille method as much as anything, it took till about 2013 before we actually got the form factor and the location right. The reality is a lot of people, and even today, aren't analyzing those bit streams all the way out at the cell towers. But it was actually bringing together the content ecosystem and the biggest MSOs that in the mid part of 2013 resulted in our first edge data center, which was Houston, Texas, which heretofore wasn't much of a peering market. If you were going to pick up content in Houston, you were going to get it Atlanta, maybe Dallas, LA, kind of depending on how things were. And the results were spectacular. You saw rebuffering go down by 25%. You saw abandonment drop by probably 80%. And if I go from 2013, what happened then was in 24 months, we built 23 data centers, which is just crazy.
You're busy.
Yeah. Today we sit here with 40 data centers, 32 markets in 3 continents. From edge on up to the biggest core for the hyperscalers.
Yeah, I heard you in a different discussion talk about, feeling somewhat responsible for eliminating the spinning pinwheel, which I thought was a really funny, comment. But one of the most annoying things many of us face when we're, either interacting with content or now even, from a business perspective, there certainly has been growth to get the cloud experience better for the business, which is certainly something we've seen and you all have been right in the middle of. What's that transition been like as you went from, the drive behind content to the edge to really the maturing business use of the cloud? And what's that been like being an operator for both types of those type of experiences?
Yeah, it's been a fun ride. And if I think about it, you hit the nail on the head. Our first job was to get rid of the spinning pinwheel. And essentially, it was as simple as bringing content closer to the consumer. Right? I'd love to tell you all the other stuff and laws of physics and speed of light and getting the costs off the backbone networks. And all that's true. But at the end of the day, you simply had to get the content to the natural drop point where it was being consumed. And it was more that direction. And we did that and focused on that primarily in 13, 14, and into the midway point of 15. And then, not surprisingly, the innovators that the cloud guys are, the hyperscalers approached us in, call it 15, and said, hey, you got content closer to the consumer. Guess what? Cloud has to get closer to the enterprise. And we were fortunate that companies like Comcast and Cox wanted to not only put their local peering for content with us, but they brought in their business nodes, which became a perfect on and off ramp for the cloud providers, and it started in the mid 15 time frame with what today are you think as EdgeConneX and express routes and those types of on and off ramps. But they also had to move out of the primary peering nodes and into the call it tier 2 markets, but really into the edge areas. It was there then that the cloud guys said, hey, we like what you've done. You've built this where it can go from 2 megawatts to 4 megawatts to 8 megawatts. How big can these go? And we like how you've been very location sensitive to the data center. So we did kind of something that wasn't heretofore done. We actually built the data center where it made the most sense for our customers. Not necessarily where it was easiest to build a data center, right? There's plenty of markets and plenty of data centers or real estate parcels. I could have found an easier, cheaper, more simple way to do it, but it wouldn't have optimized our customers' experience. And it turns out the cloud had similar challenges, whether it was new availability zones, which have certain geographic constraints on them, or new nodes on an existing availability zone, even more constrained in some ways as to where those data centers can be. So we had built up this tremendous expertise of location-sensitive data centers that turned out scaled all the way up to some of the big multi-tens of megawatts hyperscale nodes. And we stepped up and said we do what we say. We'll do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it, and we'll stand behind that contractually. And now kind of everybody's doing that. But at the time we did it, it was a little bit of a breakthrough. And we're fortunate now that that they're using us. That the cloud guys are buying really across the spectrum. Right? It's sort of a blurred line now between edge and web scale and hyperscale. But if wave 1 was content, wave 2 was certainly cloud. I'd say what I'm seeing in wave 3 are cloud enabled. So I'm seeing gaming clouds coming to the edge. I'm seeing the ecosystems around the cloud coming to the edge. Starting to see some autonomous vehicle stuff come to the edge. Early innings on IoT, but we're starting to see some interesting trends. So wave 1 content, wave 2 cloud. I'd call wave 3 cloud enabled or edge clouds. So these are actually like a gaming cloud, or frankly, you hear some of our customers talking about their edge cloud deployments that they're planning to do this year, next year, and beyond. It's been kind of fun to watch it.
I bet. Well, and your team has been right in the middle of the maturing process that these companies are walking through, and then matching the IT infrastructure to serve their business needs. You hit on a couple things when you were talking that I thought were really good points that illustrate some of the things that have been happening in the data center industry over the last several years. One is the scalability that larger users expect today from data center operators, and their ability to deliver capacity quickly. To meet the changing demands that are happening in the market all the time. Obviously, we're sitting in a very unique situation with the COVID-19 pandemic that's taking place, and that's created, challenges with every organization across the world. But talk about why those things are so important to those larger scale users, the ability to grow fast, and then also to have capacity delivered quickly so that they can consume it. Why has that become so important?
I think one of the things I've seen with the cloud guys is they're very bullish on their businesses, and they continue to underestimate how fast and how quickly they're growing. Quite frankly, I think they deliver a lot of value to their customers. And so it reminds me of the old Cisco reports. They'd always talk about how much the network was going to grow, and then the next year it'd come out and it'd be much, much steeper of a curve than what they said from the year before. I sort of get if I could write a cloud report along the same lines, I think I'd see the same thing. I think at the end of the day, I look at the big hyperscalers and Microsoft and Amazon and Google, and they do great products, right? It's great products. I think it delivers real value to the enterprises. I think when you're an enterprise and you're looking at the amount of horsepower and brain power and compute power, and in particular security, that the attention to detail on security that these cloud guys put in, they take a lot of headaches off the plate of a CIO. As a guy who grew up in the software industry and telecom, man almighty, the amount of horsepower, thinking power, and innovation that these guys are throwing at these problems takes a lot of complexity away from that CIO. So I think what's happening is we're just seeing rapid adoption. I actually think COVID, you mentioned it, I actually think COVID has been an acceleration of the digitalization of businesses. I think we've seen tremendous growth, obviously, in the first and foremost, probably in the connectivity to clouds and to content in the first 30, 45 days of COVID. And quite frankly, now we're actually seeing good old-fashioned expansion of I need more power and I need more space.
Yeah, it seems like the digital transformation of organizations that was 1, 3, 5 years out, that's literally sped up to a 1 month period, is pushing towards increased network and increased power growth in certain markets. Where you sit from the leader of EdgeConneX, and when you think about just the globalization of our business and how the data center industry, it's not enough just to have locations in a certain region of the U.S. or even several regions in the U.S. It's certainly, the business has globalized over the last several years. Talk about maybe just some of the differences in the U.S. market, European markets, Asia Pac, and just how you think about those moving forward from a maturity perspective and opportunities, as one of the leading data center operators.
So what I think I'm seeing in the market these days, and by the way, if we talk next year, I'm going to have a different answer or a more refined answer, because I'll tell you what, the speed with which things are moving is literally that quickly. But I think a few of the trends I'm seeing from where I sit here today, I'm seeing a resurgence and expansion of the edge in the North American market. We're seeing not just cloud on-ramps, but full instances of the cloud coming to the edge. So now, are they gigantic availability zones? No. Are they meaningful compute, storage, security, and full services of cloud infrastructure coming? Absolutely. So I see the proliferation of the cloud to the edge here in the United States. We're in the early days of maybe a far edge emerging, a little bit of looking for the right use cases still. I think 5G is going to accelerate some of that opportunity, dependent largely, of course, on how the networks decide to roll out that infrastructure and where they decide, how far out they decide to put that intelligence. As I look at Europe, I see Europe with two things happening: a continued and arguably even faster expansion of the big core markets, the big availability zones that have been traditionally in call it the D-flap markets or flap D markets.
Sure.
There's no slowdown there. But I think the second thing I've seen in the European arena is opening of new availability zones in new markets. So, it used to be, and it can be in countries like Germany, hey, maybe just Frankfurt isn't enough, right? Maybe I need another availability zone. Or how do I want to serve Eastern Europe? Or do we really have enough coverage in Southern Europe or Southeastern Europe, et cetera? So I think there's opportunities from all of the hyperscalers to move and create new availability zones. Now, data privacy, data sovereignty, some of those things drive some of that. But quite frankly, it's happening with or without that as well. I mean, that may be accelerating it and may draw some bright lines, but we're seeing it across the board. So the edge maybe turns into new availability zones a little bit in Europe. A couple of years from now, I think we'll get more nuanced on some of the edge deployments. Not that they're not happening, but we're seeing a lot. And then South America is another continent with which we're operating. I wouldn't call it the Wild West, but I would say we are seeing a big focus and a big opportunity, right? Brazil's always been that big anchor, and you saw a lot of great data center companies in Brazil, and there are a lot of good, great companies there. And you're seeing expansion, much like I said, in the core U.S. markets and the core European markets. You're seeing great and high growth in Brazil. But what we're seeing is the same thing in the non-Brazil whether it's Argentina or Chile or Colombia or Peru or wherever it may be, we're starting to see the need for both content and cloud to have much larger presence and footprints in those markets. So a few years behind Europe, just for sure, and a couple more years behind the U.S. Yeah, Asia's not a place we're at. Wish it were. That market seems to be, we'd probably be talking even louder and longer about some of the growth that's happening in the Asia markets.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to watch the maturity levels of different geographies, and that has to do with who's there and how the businesses really work there, how they interact with edge content. So I appreciate your commentary around that. When I think about when we were talking earlier, just when you all started EdgeConneX and your focus on really trying to understand how the trends are impacting the businesses that you all serve. I want to talk about the future for a minute, because certainly there are technologies and things that I think we all believe will impact the space in certain ways. You've mentioned a couple of them. One, you said 5G. We've talked about IoT and how that has already significantly changed the way our industry and businesses work. But I guess around that, what do you think the technologies will be that will significantly impact our industry moving forward? And what kind of timeline are we looking at? I mean, I know we're crystal balling a bit, so I recognize that. But, with some of these things, we have talked about them for a while, and I think we're all looking at the maturity of them, wondering how long will it take for autonomous cars to really become a more normal part of what we do, and not, pardon the pun, but kind of out on the edge of what we do. So, based on that, what do you think those technologies are, and what kind of time frame are we looking at with them?
Yeah. So, wow, I wish my crystal ball was that clear, right? It's not. I'm the first to acknowledge it. But I do see some interesting trends that are starting to mature, and that's probably when the rest of the world is going to see it, right? So when we started this in 2013, this is going to seem obvious. We don't target the enterprise directly, right? We stay focused in on these tech ecosystems, the cloud ecosystem, the content ecosystem, probably being at the core of it, but then there's a lot of ecosystems that come around that. Obviously the communications ecosystem that binds those together. We started them recognizing that when we looked at the data center, and particularly in the edge data centers in the tier 2 markets, there was a whole lot of low power density, low enterprise-centric data centers, and largely retail. We said, well, first of all, you got to have wholesale at any size. So you need to be able to actually run a wholesale model down to the smallest infrastructure if you're going to be able to bring these types of these enabling ecosystems in. Secondly, great news of having customers like a Microsoft and a Google and a Akamai and an Amazon and is that they're really technically sophisticated. And when you look at the power density they operate at, it's multiples higher than what an enterprise operates. A little different, right? Yeah. I mean, wow, the great news about meeting my customers is I know I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? I barely get in the door. So we started building these with higher power densities. I'm actually seeing that reality come. Now, everybody talked a game more than they could realize a game. But over the last few years, I'm actually seeing that really come to fruition. And I'd say what I see driving it is I'm seeing AI cloud instances, game cloud instances. I'm seeing some of the true instantiations of this higher density, higher processing, supercompute capabilities. So as I look to the future, I think we're going to see a continued trend on that. I think there's going to be a important role that we have to play as the data center industry. I think we've always had a green focus, and we've been doing things to make sure that we're as clean as power as can be and work with our customers and so on. I think we're going to have to take that up a notch all the way up to pure sustainability, and I think the tech industries in particular are going to help drive that and are helping drive that. So I think you're going to see us thinking about sustainability on a more holistic perspective as opposed to just a power perspective. Not that that's not important, but probably not enough. If I look forward a little bit further, it's interesting. I think you're going to see the edge go two directions. I think you're going to see it get bigger in some markets, and actually I think you're going to see the need to bring the edge even further out.
Interesting.
Now that's going to be a little bit out. Again, you have to analyze the bit stream all the way at the end. You have to have use cases that are really that latency sensitive. And of course, you have to have the connectivity all the way out there. That's probably not next year, but it's coming up in the not too distant future. What else is going to be driving us? I actually think as I think back to some of COVID, I think the acceleration that we've seen is not going to slow down. So I actually think the transition and migration to the cloud is probably been helped by this, but I don't think it's going to be slowed down. Think about how much more comfortable we're sitting here doing a Zoom conference, right? I'm a Teams addict day in, meeting in and meeting out now. Yeah. So comfortable with it. Like somebody tries to schedule a good old fashioned conference call with me. I'm like, what now?
Yeah, we're not doing that.
What are you doing? Like that's so 2019. Like what are you doing here? But I look at it and then I start thinking about the productivity gains that it's been driving. And it's really it's tangible what's happened here. Now I wish it was under better circumstances that drove it, but I think some of this is going to stick. I think a lot of people are finding that we're able to, what we thought was kind of okay, maybe I'll do it. I don't want to do that. I think we're getting pretty comfortable with some of these technologies.
Yeah, I agree. It is interesting to see what will. I think you said it, like stick around after things return to, normal or as normal as they can be. So, well, let me ask you this: just as a leader of one of the leading data center operators, what gets you most excited about continuing in this space? And having your company, I mean, you mentioned y'all went from 23 data centers to 40 data centers, from one continent to 3. I mean, you've grown significantly over the past 3 or 4 years, but what gets you excited about things moving forward?
Yeah, my customers, right? Every time I think, what can they do next? They come up with something incredible to do next. So I think what gets me really excited about it is the challenges that they continue to throw out. They're growing quickly. As a result of that growth, they're challenging us to help them grow efficiently, both which in terms of efficiently, that's a combination of quickly, with safety, with quality, and with the proper economics, right? So and I mentioned sustainability, and you got to kind of wrap that whole up in a conscientious way as well. So I think the challenges are pretty exciting. We are going to continue our geographic expansion for sure, but I'd say we're seeing a number of our existing markets doubling down, right? We've seen edge markets like Portland and Atlanta and Phoenix that we don't even think about as edges anymore, right? I mean, these have become big data center markets, but think where some of these markets were just 5 or 6 years ago, right? Certainly 10 years ago. These weren't the monster markets that we see them today. But I see a number of other of our edge markets that are starting to become core markets. So I think we're going to see a fair amount of growth there. What gets me excited, though, I said it at the beginning, our customers, right? I look at what they're doing. I look at the commercialization of AI and how it's starting to permeate everything we do, whether it's autonomous vehicles or voice recognition systems that play our music and tell us whatever else we need it to tell us. It's truly remarkable what we see happening there, and kind of exciting, right? You can actually point to stuff and explain to your kids, hey, look, we helped make that happen, right? Dad's stuff's maybe not as, you don't see that so much. That's the big building you drove by, but here's what's really going on inside those buildings.
That's great. Well, Randy, thanks so much for jumping on to our conversation. I really appreciate it in the midst of, the world that we're in today, you taking the time to do this. And from our perspective, we're certainly fans of what EdgeConneX is doing and look forward to watching you grow across the world moving forward. So thanks again.
Well, David, pleasure to do this with you. Thanks for having me on. Thank you.